Today we're going to be talking about how to improve your workflow through file naming and organization. Some people may not think this is super important, and that might be the same people who have one folder where they dump everything and it's really hard for them to find stuff. I definitely recommend having some sort of system in order to kind of keep things organized, especially on the back end, so you're able to find things quickly and work faster and not have to use the Finder search tool, which never works. Okay, so first we're going to just talk about file naming. I'm going to show you an example really quickly. It's got brand, project, element, round, version, date. It's a lot of different things going on in this file, and I'm going to explain each one through an example because that's going to make a little bit more sense. But essentially, I kind of divvy it up into these different elements to kind of help organize it and help me recognize what it is at a quick glance. Just as a note, I recommend using underscores or dashes as opposed to spaces. Spaces can become an issue when you get to passing off to a developer, or it might break a path or something like that in the code. So I'd recommend always staying with underscores or dashes or something like that to kind of break up these different elements. So really quickly, just going to look at, let's say, QT. Like if this is something for me. Sometimes I'll create small little abbreviations for the brand, especially if you're working at at an agency or freelancing. You might have a lot of different brands, so it helps to just kind of simplify things. And then even if you're in-house, like even different lines of business, having some sort of acronym for it would be great. Then it kind of breaks up into the project. Maybe you're doing branding, maybe it's a website. Just trying to divvy it up in that way. The next element might be, let's see, branding. It could be logos, it could be thumbnails, it could be icons, it could be any number of things. And then once you get to round and version, I like to do it where round is, numbered. I like to use R. Some people use V for version. I like to do round, and then the number is, when you've presented to a client or maybe to your big boss or something like that. Whereas the letter is kind of a more internal round, or you're maybe presenting to a lower level boss. So for example, you might do a couple of rounds back and forth with the person you direct report to. So it's R1A, R1B, R1C, and then you guys present that, and that becomes, you get some feedback. You start a new folder after you get back. When you start working on it again, it becomes R2A, R2B, R2C, that sort of thing. And then the date, sometimes I don't include the date. It's helpful. I usually just use it for handoffs. And again, I modify this depending on the project, depending on the client. Sometimes it makes it a little bit easier just to keep it simpler. So that's kind of it for the file naming. I'm going to just talk through really quickly what the template structure is that I use. And again, you can modify this to what works best for you. So here within my folder, I'll number everything in order to keep them in the same order, especially based on when I got the client. That makes a lot of sense to how I organize things, but you don't have to do it this way. However, yeah, so first you got like the 000, that's always gonna be at the top. It's for myself. I've got mockups, I've got my portfolio, maybe I've got my PDF that I can send out to people, or different elements of my website, profile pictures, templates for your contract or presentation, things that are your personal branding. Your logo could be in here too, time tracking, all that stuff, as well as a template folder that we're going to copy and paste into anytime we get a new client. So for example, client number 1, 001, within this, I usually do a 001 to match this, and then the dash 00 assets. And this is kind of almost like the self folder is to the rest of your clients. These assets apply to everything within this client. So not just project based, but maybe it's got your contract with them or your invoices or any sort of templates, that sort of thing could pass into this assets folder. And once you get into like a specific project, like for example, project 1 could be branding. So within it, you've got your client. This could be, their creative brief or any images they've passed you or presentations they've given. You kind of can store that. You can reference it back instead of having to dig through your email. The art folder, you can call this whatever you want. I like to call it art because it includes, swipe that I pulled off the internet for reference. Imagery could be, maybe stuff we've shot or, stuff from stock sites or something like that. And the mockups could be pulled directly copied from my self folder, brought in here. I can modify it. I don't have to worry about duplicating it. Copy, I'm no copywriter, but they'll provide copy sometimes. It's a good place to put it. Deliverables, this is once everything's, you hand off in different chunks. Like for example, this could be a logo handoff. I usually try and follow this when I do a handoff, just so I'm sure everything is I'm passing off the right files. So it's usually folder, zip file in this deliverables. Layouts, this depends. I like to call it layouts because it's not always in Illustrator. It's not always, one or particular file type. Sometimes it switches. Sometimes you have multiples. And again, this is going back to that file naming structure. R1, could be within here. Illustrator file R1A, R1B. You present, whatever your last one is. Then it takes you to R2. You copy and paste that in. Go in and delete whatever didn't get chosen. You can keep working. And what's really nice about this is your most important, most recent working file is always going to be at the bottom, just because you're labeling them as you go. And then presentations work very similarly. The only difference would be maybe having a support folder within the presentations, or even within each presentation. This is, if you're working in InDesign or Keynote, and you need to just bring in, an image or something for reference, that it doesn't apply to the entire project or the entire client. It's just for this presentation. It works really well to just put in that support folder. And you can see that I've got the dash here, the underscore here. That brings things up to the top. The tilde key also does that. That's just a way of keeping it so it's always at the top, so it doesn't fall into the middle of all these other things which are alphabetized. So, and then the last thing we want to talk about was, when do we create new files? And that just goes back to what we were talking about here. You can do it whenever. I'm a big fan of not deleting files ever. I think it's really helpful. Let's say you get to round 8 and you have a super indecisive client because you're on round 8, and they decide they want to go back to round 2. It helps to be able to reference that, and because you didn't delete the file. So I think whenever you're going to a new round, or even if it's an internal round, I would recommend just creating a new file then, just so you have it all backed up. Files, especially with Illustrator, your files don't get too big if you're not working on crazy stuff. With lots of anchor points and embedded images and that sort of thing. I tend to create a lot more new files in Illustrator than I do in InDesign or Photoshop, because those files tend to have a lot more elements in them. So I tend to not duplicate it as much. But it's a personal preference, and I'd rather be safe than sorry. So that's what we're talking about with regards to faster workflow. How to name your files, how to organize everything. Just to help speed you up so you can find things faster, work faster, and not be confused with your own files. So that's today's quick tip. And let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.